My stepmom kicked me out when I refused to give her the inheritance my grandpa left me. Pretty soon, that inheritance made me a millionaire. Life is a funny way of showing you who really cares about you. For me, that lesson came with a slammed door and the echo of my stepmom's voice telling me to never come back. I'm Ethan Parker, 19, from the dusty outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, and 3 weeks ago I became homeless because I refused to sell a patch of desert that my grandfather left me. It all started when Grandpa Walter passed away last month. The old man was the only person who ever really got me. While my dad was busy with his new picture-perfect family, Grandpa was the one taking me on adventures in his beat-up Ford pickup, showing me how to catch lizard with my bare hands, and telling me stories that made the world seem bigger than our small desert town. Grandpa Walter wasn't like other adults. He was this tall, weathered guy with hands like leather gloves and eyes that crinkled when he laughed. He wore the same faded denim jacket for as long as I could remember and kept his gray hair tied back in a ponytail that drove my stepmom Susan absolutely crazy. "Looks like a hippie," she'd mutter whenever he came over. My favorite memories were the nights spent in his old trailer, this silver 1970s relic parked on his property about 15 miles out of town. We'd sit on these plastic lawn chairs under the stars, him sipping warm cola from a can, me munching on salty crackers, while Johnny Cash played softly from his ancient radio. The reception would fade in and out, but Grandpa never seemed to mind. "Life's like the desert, boy," he'd tell me, pointing at the vast darkness beyond his land. "Looks empty to most folks, but the real treasures are hiding just beneath the sand. You just got nowhere to dig." He'd tell me about the fireball that fell from the sky when he was a young man, how it streaked across the night, lighting up the desert like daytime, before crashing somewhere on his land. "Left a treasure out there," he'd insist, "something that ain't from this earth." I always figured these were just stories to entertain a lonely kid. Grandpa was the kind of guy who believed space was closer than most people thought. He'd watch those UFO shows on the History Channel with total seriousness, nodding along like they were documentaries. When I'd laugh, he'd just tap his temple and say, "The universe has more secrets than we have questions, Ethan." Looking back, I should have paid more attention. But when you're a teenager, you're too busy trying to figure out your own life to listen to an old man's desert tales. The day of the will reading was when everything fell apart. We all gathered in the stuffy lawyer's office. Me, my dad Robert, stepmom Susan, and her daughter Hannah. Susan had done her makeup perfectly, as usual, looking like she'd stepped out of one of those home decor magazines she obsessively collected. Hannah, 17, my stepsister who treated me like I was invisible, was glued to her phone, probably updating her TikTok. The lawyer, this balding guy with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat and started reading. Grandpa's was pretty straightforward. Dad got the main house and the small farm attached to it. Not that he'd ever shown much interest in either. He'd stopped visiting Grandpa regularly after marrying Susan 7 years ago. Then came the surprise. To my grandson, Ethan Parker, I leave my trailer and the 10 acres of desert land surrounding it, including all contents and possessions therein. Susan's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might fly off her forehead. "That's it?" she asked the lawyer. "The worthless plot with nothing on it except that rusty old trailer?" The lawyer just shrugged. "That's what the will states." I remember feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, I had just inherited actual land, something number 19-year-old I knew could claim. On the other hand, even I knew it wasn't worth much. Just a stretch of desert with Grandpa's trailer, a few cacti, and a lot of sand. Susan started laughing, this high-pitched, nervous sound. "That place isn't fit for snakes. We should sell it immediately." She turned to me with that fake smile she always used when trying to manipulate someone. "Ethan, honey, we could put that money toward your community college fund. Wouldn't that be nice?" I knew better, though. Susan had been complaining for months about Hannah's private university tuition and how they'd need to take out another mortgage if they couldn't find the money soon. This wasn't about my education. This was about Hannah's. "I'm keeping it," I said, surprising even myself at how firm my voice sounded. The drive home was silent, but I could feel the tension building like before a thunderstorm. Susan's perfect French manicure tapped impatiently against the steering wheel. Dad stared out the window, already checking out the conflict he knew was coming. Hannah snickered from the back seat, whispering something to her friend on the phone about living in a trailer like white trash. It all exploded during dinner. Susan slammed her fork down beside her barely touched salad and fixed me with those cold blue eyes. Ethan, be reasonable. That land is our opportunity to get out of debt. Hannah's tuition is due next month, and your father's carpentry business isn't doing well with the economy these days. Dad just stood behind his newspaper, mumbling, "Listen to Susan, son," like he always did. The man had turned avoiding conflict into an Olympic sport. I stabbed at my meatloaf, trying to stay calm. It's Grandpa's land. He wanted me to have it. For what? Susan's voice rose an octave. To play Desert Explorer? To hunt for aliens like that crazy old man. She smoothed her napkin, tried to regain her Pinterest-perfect composure. Sell the land, Ethan, or you're not part of this family anymore. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was hearing her call Grandpa crazy. Maybe it was the ultimatum. Or maybe it was just years of feeling like an unwelcome guest in what was supposed to be my home. That land isn't just dirt. I shot back. It's Grandpa. It's the only place where I ever felt like I belonged. I'm not selling it. Not for Hannah's tuition. Not for your debts. Not for anything. Susan's face turned a shade of red that didn't match her carefully selected living room color palette. Then get out. If you care more about a worthless patch of desert than your family, you don't belong here. Dad finally lowered his newspaper, looking alarmed. Susan, let's not. No, Robert. I've had it with your son's ingratitude. He either sells that land or finds somewhere else to live. My house, my rules. I looked at my dad, hoping he'd finally stand up for me. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something there. Regret, maybe? Sadness? But then he looked away and mumbled, "Do what she says, Ethan. It's just land." It wasn't just land, but they'd never understand that. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, grabbed my laptop, and the few $100s I'd saved from my part-time job at the gas station. As I walked out the door, I heard Hannah laughing. Guess he'll be living with the coyotes now. That night, I drove my old Honda to Grandpa's, my trailer. The key was still where he always kept it, under a fake rock that fooled absolutely no one. The trailer smelled like dust and old leather, and faintly of Grandpa's aftershave. It was like a time capsule of his life, untouched since his death. I crashed on the ancient pull-out couch, staring up at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa had put up for me when I was 8 still clung stubbornly to the paneling. The electricity was still on. I'd have to figure out how to pay that bill soon, but there was no running water yet. I'd deal with that tomorrow. Sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about how quickly my so-called family had thrown me away, about how I now own land but had no home, about how Grandpa would have handled the situation with one of his cryptic sayings and a wry smile. Around midnight, I got up and began looking through Grandpa's things, hoping to find some comfort in his possessions, his old vinyl records, his collection of geodes and interesting rocks, his books on astronomy and unexplained phenomena, classic Grandpa Walter stuff. That's when I found his Bible. It wasn't that Grandpa was particularly religious. He'd say he was more spiritual than church-going, but he kept this worn leather Bible that had belonged to his father before him. I'd never seen him read it, but he always kept it on his bedside table. I'd picked it up, feeling the soft, cracked leather under my fingers. When I opened it, a yellowed piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. It looked like it had been torn from an old notebook, the edges frayed with age. My heart nearly stopped when I read what was written on it, in Grandpa's unmistakable blocky handwriting. 33 degrees, 51 minutes, 20.8 seconds north 100, and 12 degrees, 14 minutes, 48.3 seconds west, where the star fell. Coordinates. Specific coordinates. And suddenly all those stories about fireballs in the sky didn't seem quite so far-fetched. I lay back down on the couch, clutching both the Bible and the paper to my chest. Maybe Grandpa Walter wasn't just telling tales. Maybe there really was something out there in the desert, something worth keeping this land for. Or maybe I was just desperate to believe that I hadn't thrown away my home for nothing but dirt and cacti. "If you were right, Grandpa," I whispered to glow-in-the-dark stars above me, "I'll find your treasure. But what if it's all just dust?" I suddenly wondered why Grandpa never dug up this treasure himself if he had the exact coordinates. Then I remembered something he'd told me years ago. He'd tried searching when he was younger, but his metal detector broke, and some health problems, his bad back and later his heart condition, had stopped him from digging. "Some treasures wait for the right person at the right time," he'd said once. Maybe he'd been saving this hunt for me all along. As I drifted off to sleep, the coordinates clutched in my hand. I couldn't help but wonder if I was chasing fairy tales, or if Grandpa Walter had left me more than just land. Either way, I had nothing left to lose. Turns out Hannah wasn't entirely wrong about the coyotes. They became my closest neighbors over the next few weeks. Living in Grandpa's trailer quickly proved to be a masterclass in survival that no amount of YouTube tutorials could prepare me for. The first morning, I woke up to a roof leak directly above my face, Mother Nature's alarm clock. The ancient air conditioning unit wheezed like it was on life support during the day and quit entirely when temperatures hit triple digits. Water came from gallons I had to haul from town, since the well pump broke years ago. Electricity worked, thankfully, but the internet was non-existent. I joked to myself that the spiders were spinning webs in the corners to provide Wi-Fi, but even they seemed to be getting poor reception. My breakfast consisted of whatever canned food I could find at Walmart on clearance. Beans, corn, and those suspicious meat products with ingredients I couldn't pronounce became my gourmet meals. I started naming the bigger spiders in the corners just to have someone to talk to. Charlotte by the sink seemed particularly judgmental of my cooking skills. The coyotes would howl at night, their cries echoing across the desert. Sometimes I'd sit outside on Grandpa's faded lawn chair and howl back. They probably thought I was crazy, but at least they answered, which was more than my dad had done. Not a single call since I left. My savings wouldn't last long. I kept my job at Roy's Gas and Go, a dusty little filling station on the highway, though the 40-minute drive each way was eating through my gas money faster than I could earn it. Roy, the owner, was an old friend of Grandpa's, a Vietnam vet with a permanent scowl and a surprisingly soft spot for stray cats and apparently stray teenagers. "Your grandpa was a good man," Roy told me while I was restocking the beef jerky rack. Bit touched in the head about that space stuff, but a good man. Coming from Roy, that was practically a sonnet. Word had gotten around town about my situation. In small desert communities, gossip travels faster than tumbleweeds. The regulars at the gas station started treating me differently. Some with pity, which I hated, and others with this weird respect, like I'd joined some desert survivalist club. Then there were the jokers, like Mike Henson, a balding guy with a permanent sunburn who delivered beer to the station twice a week. "Hey, it's the UFO kid," he called out one afternoon while I was sweeping the parking lot. "Found any little green men on your grandpa's land yet?" He guffawed, slapping his knee like he just delivered a killer punchline on a comedy special. I just shrugged. "Not yet, but when I do, I'll make sure they abduct you first, Mike." The other guys hanging around the pump snickered, and Mike's face turned a deeper shade of red that had nothing to do with the sun. I'd learned from Grandpa that sometimes the best defense was a quicker comeback. Despite the jokes, I couldn't get those coordinates out of my head. During lunch breaks, I'd pull out my phone and stare at the Google Maps satellite view of my property, try and figure out exactly where 33 degrees 51 minutes 20.8 seconds north 112 degrees 14 minutes 48.3 seconds west might be. But satellite images only show me a lot of brown nothing, indistinguishable from the miles of desert surrounding it. I needed a metal detector. If Grandpa's stories about a fireball from the sky were true, maybe it was a meteorite. Those things could contain iron, right? A metal detector would help. But new ones cost hundreds of dollars I didn't have. As luck would have it, Destiny, yes, that was actually her name, who worked the register at Roy's, mentioned that her uncle had an old metal detector he was looking to get rid of. "It's ancient," like from when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But it still beeps and stuff, she explained, blowing a large pink bubble with her gum. This uncle turned out to be a lanky guy named Terry who looked like he'd been preserved in amber since 1975, complete with mutton chops and a faded Led Zeppelin t-shirt. His trailer at the edge of town was surrounded by what he called a collection and what most people would call evidence for an episode of Hoarders. $15 and she's yours, Terry said, holding up a metal detector that indeed looked like it had seen better days. The brand name had worn off, and it was held together in parts by duct tape. But when he put in fresh batteries and waved it over a pile of scrap metal, it screeched to life. Still works better than my ex-wife. Har har. I handed over the cash, feeling like I'd either just made the smartest investment of my young life or completely wasted $15 I couldn't afford to lose. But Grandpa always said that sometimes you had to risk something to find anything worth having. Back at the trailer, I went through more of Grandpa's belongings, hoping to find additional clues. In a dusty box under his bed, I discovered a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. The pages were filled with his distinctive handwriting, observations about star patterns, sketches of the desert landscape, and recurring mentions of the firestone that fell from the stars. One page had a rough map drawn on it, with a crooked cactus marked at the center and what looked like a crater or depression nearby. Beneath it, Grandpa had written, "The earth remembers where heaven touched it. The depression remains." Another page had a newspaper clipping from 1974 about meteor showers observed in Arizona. Grandpa had circled one paragraph about a particularly bright streak that witnesses claimed disappeared behind the mountains west of Phoenix. I suddenly felt less crazy. Maybe there really was something to find out there. Or maybe Grandpa had just read too many Superman comics and convinced himself that a chunk of kryptonite had landed in his backyard. Either way, I was going to find out. The next morning, after a breakfast of cold beans eaten straight from the can, I was living my best apocalypse survivor fantasy. I loaded up with water bottles, sunscreen, and my new metal detector. The Arizona sun was merciless, already pushing 90 degrees by 8 a.m. I wore Grandpa's old denim hat for protection. It smelled like him, a mix of aftershave and desert dust that made me feel less alone. Using my phone's GPS, I tried to locate the exact coordinates. The signal kept dropping out there in the middle of nowhere, but I eventually found what I thought was a right spot, a flat stretch of desert about a quarter mile from the trailer, with nothing distinguishing from the 100 yards in any direction except perhaps a slightly higher concentration of scraggly brush. I switched on a metal detector, which emitted a wheezy hum that didn't inspire confidence. Sweeping it back and forth in front of me, I began walking in expanding circles from the GPS point, like a kid playing the world's most boring game of hot and cold. 2 hours later, I had found 3 rusted nails, a Budweiser can so old it had probably been dropped during the Carter administration, what looked like part of an old fence, a belt buckle that might have been cool if it wasn't corroded beyond recognition, and most exciting of all, an ancient mattress spring that had somehow migrated to the middle of nowhere. "If this is your idea of treasure, Grandpa," I muttered, wiping sweat from my eyes, "then I'm the king of the junkyard." The desert heat was becoming unbearable, and my water bottles were getting dangerously warm. This routine continued for days. Wake up, work at the gas station, come home, search until sundown, find nothing of value, repeat. Roy started calling me the prospector whenever I shuffled into work looking exhausted. "Find any gold yet?" he'd ask, and I'd just shake my head. I was starting to doubt everything. The coordinates, Grandpa's stories, my own sanity for believing any of it. Maybe this was all an elaborate wild goose chase designed to teach me some life lesson about persistence. Grandpa was philosophical like that. One particularly discouraging evening, after finding nothing but an old rusty hinge, I sat on a rock watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and red. The heat was finally breaking, and the first cool breeze of the day rustled through the sparse vegetation. I remembered something else Grandpa used to say, "The desert tests your soul before it gives up its secrets." Well, my soul was feeling pretty tested right about then. As the light changed, casting long shadows across the land, something caught my eye, a subtle difference in terrain about 50 yards east of where I'd been searching. It looked like a shallow depression in the ground, maybe 20 feet across, ringed by slightly more vegetation than the surrounding area. Curious, I walked over to it. The ground had indeed dipped slightly, forming a shallow bowl, and right at the center stood a twisted, gnarled cactus, eerily similar to the one drawn in Grandpa's journal. My heart started pounding harder. I pulled out the journal from my backpack and compared the sketch to what I was seeing. The resemblance was uncanny. Had I been searching in the wrong spot all this time? The GPS coordinates had led me close, but not to this exact location. With renewed energy, I fired up the metal detector and began sweeping it across the depression. For a few minutes, nothing but the usual sporadic beeps as it picked up tiny bits of metal in the soil. Then, as I approached the center near the base of the cactus, the detector went crazy, letting out a sustained, high-pitched wail louder than I'd heard from it before. Whatever was down there, it was big, and it contained a lot of metal. Dropping to my knees, I started digging with the small folding shovel I brought. The ground was hard and packed with rocks, making progress slow and painful. My hands quickly developed blisters that popped and bled, but I barely noticed. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of purple and orange. I'd have to finish tomorrow. Digging in the dark wasn't just difficult. In rattlesnake country, it could be dangerous. As I reluctantly packed up my gear, I allowed myself to feel the first real hope since this whole ordeal began. Whatever was buried here, it was something substantial, not just another beer can or a piece of scrap metal. Sweat stinging my eyes, I looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Grandpa," I whispered, "if this turns out to be an old Pepsi can, I swear I'm giving up. But please don't let me down." The metal detector had promised something big. Tomorrow, I'd find out what secrets the desert had been keeping all these years. Tomorrow, I'd discover if Grandpa's stories were just tall tales or something far more extraordinary. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the metal detector's urgent wail, like it was trying to tell me something incredible waited just beneath the surface. By 5 a.m., I was already up, gulping down instant coffee that tasted like liquefied cardboard and packing extra water bottles. The desert might be cool in the morning, but by noon it would show no mercy. Dawn was just breaking as I returned to the depression with my shovel and metal detector. The twisted cactus stood like a sentinel, watching over whatever secret lay buried nearby. I placed Grandpa's journal on a flat rock, opened to a sketch of this very spot. It felt right having him there with me, in a way. I resumed digging where I'd left off, the metal detector screaming whenever I passed it over the hole. The work was brutal. The Arizona soil was mostly hard-packed clay and rocks in this spot. By mid-morning, I dug almost 6 feet down, creating a pit large enough that I had to carefully climb in and out. My arms felt like jelly, but I wasn't giving up. Then my shovel struck something solid with a distinctive clink that was different from hitting ordinary desert rocks. That sound of metal against something dense sent an electric jolt through my body. This was another beer can or piece of junk. This was substantial. Dropping to my knees, I began clearing away dirt with my hands, ignoring the stinging of yesterday's blisters. Something dark and oddly shaped began to emerge. It took another 30 minutes of careful excavation before I could fully extract it from its decades-long resting place. I sat back on my heels, staring in disbelief at what lay before me. It was a rock unlike anything I'd ever seen, about the size of a football but heavier, with a blackened, scorched exterior that seemed to have partially melted and resolidified. But what made my breath catch were the patches where the outer layer had chipped away, revealing a gleaming interior studded with what looked like green crystals that caught the morning light and scattered it in tiny rainbows. "Holy shit," I whispered, then looked around as if the desert might scold me for cursing. "Grandpa, you were either a genius or the best storyteller in Arizona." I couldn't stop staring at it. This thing, whatever it was, didn't look like it belonged on Earth. The dark exterior was pitted with tiny dimples, like the surface of a golf ball. When I tentatively touched it, it felt cool despite the warming air, and strangely smooth in some places, rough in others. Lifting it took effort. The thing must have weighed at least 30 pounds. I cradled it against my chest like a newborn, half afraid it might disintegrate if I handled it too roughly. The walk back to the trailer felt both longer and shorter than usual, my mind racing faster than my feet could carry me. Back at the trailer, I cleared a space on the kitchen table and set the rock down, circling it like it might suddenly sprout legs and run away. What exactly was I looking at? A meteorite? Some weird geological formation? A chunk of space junk? Whatever it was, Grandpa had known it was here, had maybe even seen it fall from the sky all those years ago. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning it carefully with a soft brush, revealing more of the green crystalline structures embedded within. They weren't emeralds. I knew that much from a school field trip to a natural history museum. But they weren't like any rock I'd seen in Arizona either. The practical side of me, the side that had learned to count pennies for gas and Walmart clearance food, wondered if this thing had any actual value beyond proving Grandpa wasn't crazy. I needed a second opinion from someone who knew about rocks, but I wasn't exactly flush with geologist friends. In a moment of what was either brilliant marketing or complete idiocy, I decided to make a TikTok video. My phone's data connection at the trailer was spotty at best, but it would upload eventually. I propped my phone against a can of beans and hit record. So I just dug this up on my property. I said, lifting the rock to show its strange exterior and then turning it to reveal the glinting green crystals. My grandfather told me stories about a fireball falling from the sky, and I think this might be it. Maybe I can finally afford a shower that doesn't involve a garden hose and cold water. I added a couple of trending hashtags. Hashtag meteorite, hashtag treasure, hashtag space rock, and let upload while I went to work at the gas station. Roy raised his bushy eyebrows when I walked in looking like I'd won the lottery. "Found something, did you?" he asked, refilling the coffee pot that had probably never been properly cleaned since the Bush administration. The first Bush. I just grinned. Maybe need an expert to look at it. Huh. You know, the community college has a geology department. My niece took a class there last year. Said the professor was some big shot who retired from NASA or something. By the time my shift ended, my TikTok had racked up a whopping 500 views and a comment section that was less than encouraging. "Nice rock, genius." Wrote someone called it "Dude, where's my vape?" That's literally just a chunk of asphalt. Another commenter suggested I'd found ancient alien poop, while someone else said, "Your grandpa trolled you from the grave, LOL." I laughed it off, but the comment stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent weeks hunting for this thing, and my excitement was real. Having strangers mock, it felt like they were mocking Grandpa too. The next morning, I carefully wrapped the rock in an old towel, placed it in a milk crate secured to the passenger's seat with a seatbelt, which seemed both ridiculous and entirely necessary, and drove to Phoenix Mesa Community College. Their website listed a Dr. Howard Melnick as the head of the geology department, office hours Tuesdays and Thursdays 1 to 3 p.m. The geology department turned out to be a single hallway on the ground floor of the science building, with display cases full of labeled rocks and minerals lining the walls. Dr. Melnick's office door was plastered with Far Side cartoons and bumper stickers with geology puns like Geologist Rock, and "It's not just a boulder, it's a rock." I knocked, half expecting to be ignored or chased away. Instead, a gruff voice called out for me to enter. Inside, a man who looked like he could be ZZ Top's long-lost brother sat behind a desk overflowing with papers and rock samples. His white beard reached nearly to his chest, and tiny spectacles perched on a nose that had clearly been broken at least once. When I explained why I was there, he sighed heavily. Everyone thinks they found a meteorite. It's always just slag from old mining operations or weird-looking basalt. But all right, let's see what you've got. I unwrapped my treasure, setting it carefully on his desk. Dr. Melnick's expression changed instantly from bored annoyance to sharp interest. He reached for it, then stopped. "May I?" I nodded, and he picked it up with reverence, turning it over in his hands. He grabbed a magnifying glass from a drawer and examined the crystalline structure, occasionally making noises that could have meant anything. After what seemed like an eternity, he set it down and looked at me over his glasses. "Where exactly did you find this?" I hesitated, suddenly protective of my land and its secrets. "On my property, near Phoenix." My grandfather left me some land. And your grandfather was? Walter Parker. Dr. Melnick's eyes widened slightly. Walt Parker? The guy who used to call in to the university claiming he saw something fall from the sky back in the 70s? My heart skipped. You knew him? Not personally, but his name was a bit of a running joke in the department for years. Everyone thought he was just another UFO nut. He looked back at the rock with newfound respect. Maybe the old man was onto something after all. Dr. Melnick explained that he couldn't make a definitive identification without tests, which would take time. He asked if he could keep the rock for analysis, promising to call me as soon as he knew anything. I reluctantly agreed, writing my number on a post-it note he stuck directly to the rock. A week passed with no word. I continued my routine, working at a gas station, fixing up the trailer bit by bit, trying not to obsess over whether my discovery was truly special or just another desert disappointment. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon while I was restocking the beef jerky display, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Dr. Melnick, and he sounded like he'd just run a marathon. Ethan, Howard Melnick here. I need you to come to my office. Today, if possible. His tone sent a jolt of both excitement and anxiety through me. 2 hours later, I sat across from him as he slid a folder of test results across his desk. What you found, he said, his voice hushed as if sharing a state secret, is a palisite meteorite. And not just any palisite, one of the largest and most well-preserved specimens I've ever seen or read about. He explained that palisites were extremely rare, formed at the boundary between the iron core and rocky mantle of destroyed asteroids or planets. The green crystals weren't emeralds but olivine, a mineral that could form deep inside planets under intense pressure. In layman's terms, kid, you're holding a piece of the collision that might have destroyed a planet in our solar system billions of years ago. The scientific value alone is considerable. I tried to process this information, my mind stuck on one practical question. Does that mean it's worth something? Dr. Melnick removed his glasses, polishing them with his shirt. I've taken the liberty of reaching out to some colleagues. Confidentially, of course. There's a private space research company in Los Angeles that's very interested. They're willing to offer $2.5 million. I nearly fell out of my chair. $2.5 million? American dollars. Yes, son, American dollars. He smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Your grandfather wasn't crazy after all. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The space research company, Astro Frontier Technologies, sent representatives to authenticate the meteorite and formalize the offer. News of my discovery leaked to local media, and suddenly I found myself being interviewed by Phoenix news stations, my face plastered across the Arizona Republic with headlines like Desert Dream. Local teen finds $1 million meteorite on inherited land. People who had dismissed Grandpa as a crackpot for years were suddenly claiming they'd always believed his stories. The gas station became a hotspot for locals hoping to catch a glimpse of the meteorite kid. Roy had to shoo away treasure hunters who kept asking if I'd found anything else out there. Through it all, I kept thinking about Grandpa, about all those nights under the stars, listening to his stories about the fireball and the treasure. He'd been right all along, but he never got to see the proof. Or maybe he'd seen it, had known exactly where it was, but had saved this moment for me. I remembered something he told me once, during one of our late-night stargazing sessions. The real treasure isn't what you hold, Ethan. It's what you do with it that counts. The Astro Frontier executives were pushing me to sign the paperwork and hand over the meteorite. The money would solve every problem I had. I could buy a real house, finish college without debt, never worry about clearing section canned beans again. But something didn't feel right. This wasn't just a rock. It was Grandpa's legacy. Selling it to some corporation that would lock it away in a private lab didn't honor what he believed in. That wonder of the universe, the magic of looking up at the stars and knowing they weren't as far away as they seemed. So I made a different decision, one that I think would have made Grandpa proud. Instead of selling the meteorite outright, I worked with Dr. Melnick to approach the local Natural History Museum. We arranged a deal where the meteorite would be displayed in a new wing dedicated to astronomy and space science. named after Walter Parker. The museum would pay me $850,000 up front, plus a 5% percentage of the increased ticket sales and educational program fees for the next 20 years. The agreement also included funding for scientific research on the meteorite, with findings published under my grandfather's name. It wasn't the $2.5 million that Astral Frontier had offered, but it was enough to buy the adjacent plot of land for $175,000 and invest the rest in building a small but proper visitors center where Grandpa's trailer stood, a place where kids could learn about meteorites and space, and hear the story of a man who knew the desert held secrets from the stars. The local paper ran another story. Teen turns down millions to honor grandfather's legacy. The comments online were split between people calling me inspirational and others questioning my sanity for not taking full amount. But for once, I didn't care what strangers thought. As I was signing the final paperwork with the museum director, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I hadn't heard from in months. My dad. Susan and Hannah are coming to see you tomorrow. They heard about the meteorite on the news. I laughed out loud, startling the museum director. Of course they were coming now that the worthless land had yielded a multi-million-dollar discovery, now that the crazy stories had proven true. Now I was family again. I texted back a simple, okay, and put my phone away, signing my name on the dotted line. Tomorrow would be interesting. I smiled to myself, wondering how much this sudden family reunion was going to cost them. They arrived at exactly 11:30 the next morning in a gleaming white Cadillac Escalade that looked so out of place in the desert it might as well have been a spaceship. I was sitting on the steps of my trailer, the Walter Parker Visitor Center construction site now, drinking coffee and pretending this was just another Tuesday. Susan stepped out first, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than all the clothes I'd ever owned combined. Her hair was freshly highlighted, her makeup flawless, as if she'd just walked off a Real Housewives set. Hannah emerged next, her face buried in her phone, occasionally glancing up with the enthusiasm of someone attending a mandatory school assembly. I stayed seated, watching them pick their way carefully across the desert sand in their designer shoes, Susan's heels sinking with each step. The look of disgust on her face as she navigated around a small cactus would have been priceless if I hadn't been so annoyed by their very presence. When they got within 10 feet, Susan's face transformed, a Joker-worthy smile spreading across her features as she opened her arms wide. "Ethan, my goodness, look at you. We've been so worried." Right, so worried they hadn't called or texted once in 3 months. She engulfed me in a cloud of expensive perfume, hugging me like we were reuniting on a reality show. Over her shoulder, I could see Hannah rolling her eyes, thumbs still flying across her phone screen. "I'm fine," I said flatly when Susan finally released me. "As you can see." "We saw you on the news," she gushed, gesturing vaguely at the land around us. "Finding that meteor thing. Your father would have come too, but he's swamped at work. You know how it is with his business." I knew exactly how it was. Dad was probably hiding at home, too cowardly to face me after choosing Susan over his own son. Work was just a convenient excuse it had always been. Meteorite. I corrected, not meteor. "Whatever," Hannah chimed in, finally pocketing her phone. "It's like super cool, though. All my friends were freaking out that my stepbrother found literal space rock." She said stepbrother like it was a term she just learned, as if we hadn't lived in the same house for 7 years. "So..." Susan looked around, her eyes scanning the property with the calculation of a real estate appraiser. "Is this where you're living? Still in the trailer? I thought with all that money from the meteorite, you'd have upgraded by now." "I'm investing in something more important," I replied, standing up and gesturing toward the construction site where the foundation for the visitor center was being laid. "Come on, I'll show you what I'm doing with Grandpa's legacy." Their faces fell slightly at the word investing, but they followed me nonetheless. Susan chattered about how they'd seen my picture in the paper and how proud they were, how they'd always known I was special. The same Susan who, 3 months ago, had called me stubborn and ungrateful for not selling this worthless land. As we walked, I pointed out where the Walter Parker Space Science Center would stand. Nothing fancy. Just a 2,000 square foot building with educational displays, a small theater for presentations, and of course, a special climate-controlled exhibit for the meteorite itself. The trailer would stay too, preserved as part of the site's history. But where's the actual meteorite now? Hannah asked, perking up for the first time. She was probably calculating its dollar value per ounce. At the Natural History Museum in Phoenix. They're building a special display for it in their new Space Sciences wing, also named after Grandpa Walter. I added with a touch of pride. I'm partnering with them instead of selling to a private company. Susan's smile tightened at the corners. Partnering? What does that mean exactly? I explained the deal, the upfront payment, the ongoing percentage, the educational programs. With each detail, Susan's expression soured further, like she was sucking on an increasingly bitter lemon. But the news said it was worth millions. Hannah interjected. Why would you settle for less? That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense if you knew Grandpa, I replied, stopping at the edge of the construction area where an architectural rendering of the completed center was displayed on a sign. He believed knowledge should be shared, not locked away in some corporate vault. Susan's patience finally snapped. Ethan, be practical. That old man filled your head with nonsense about space rocks and treasures, and now that there's actually real money involved, you're throwing it away on, what, some monument to his delusions? And there it was, the real Susan, emerging from behind the designer's sunglasses and fake smiles. I should have felt angry, but instead I felt oddly relieved. At least we were being honest now. Those delusions led me to a scientific discovery worth studying, I said calmly. And this monument will help kids get excited about science and astronomy, just like Grandpa did for me. Hannah snorted. God, you sound just like him. Next you'll be telling us you saw little green men in the desert. I remembered how she'd laughed when Susan kicked me out. Let him live with the coyotes, she'd said. Now she was standing on the land she'd mocked, wanting a piece of what it had yielded. Let's cut the chase, I suggested, crossing my arms. You didn't drive all this way to admire my architectural plans. What do you want? Susan adjusted her designer handbag. All pretense of family reunion abandoned. Your father and I have been discussing your situation. We think, as your parents, we should help manage this windfall. You're only 19, Ethan. You don't have the experience to handle this kind of money responsibly. The audacity was almost impressive. My situation? You mean the one where you threw me out of the house? We were emotional, she waved dismissively. Family arguments happen. But we're here now, and we want to help. Help yourselves, you mean, I corrected. Dad has no legal right to my inheritance, and you certainly don't. The land was left to me, not him. The meteorite was found on my property. The museum deal is in my name. Susan's face flushed red, but she maintained her composure. Hannah's tuition is due next month. Her university raised the rates again, and with your father's business struggling. Not my problem. I cut in, surprised by my own firmness. 3 months ago, I might have folded, might have handed over whatever they asked for just to feel like part of the family again. But living out here, surviving on my own, discovering something that validated everything Grandpa had believed in, it had changed me. How can you be so selfish? Hannah exploded. You're sitting on a fortune while we're drowning in debt. That's not how family treats each other. I couldn't help laughing. Family? Is that what we are now? Funny, I didn't feel like family when Susan was calling Grandpa crazy, or when you were making jokes about me living with coyotes. I didn't feel like family when Dad wouldn't even look me in the eye as I packed my bags. Susan's strategy shifted, her voice softening to the tone she used when trying to manipulate my father. Ethan, honey, we've all made mistakes, but we're still your family. All we're asking is that you reconsider this museum nonsense and make the practical choice. That private company offered you millions. Think what you could do with that money. College, a real house, travel. I've made my decision, I stated firmly. The meteorite stays in the museum where everyone can learn from it, not locked in some corporate lab. The visitor center gets built. Grandpa's legacy lives on. End of story. Susan's mask of politeness finally shattered completely. Your grandfather was a fool who wasted his life chasing fantasies, and now you're going to waste yours doing the same? For what? Some misplaced sense of loyalty to a dead man. The words stung, but not as much as they once might have. I'd heard variations of this argument my entire life. That Grandpa was crazy, that his interests were worthless, that practicality should always trump passion. It had taken finding the meteorite to realize how wrong they'd been all along. If being practical means becoming like you, I replied quietly, then I'll happily be a fool. Hannah made a disgusted noise. This is so stupid. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. That gave me an idea, one that was petty perhaps, but too satisfying to resist. You know what? You're right. Family should help each other. So I have a proposition for you both. I gestured toward the construction area. The visitor center will need staff when it opens. I can offer you jobs. Minimum wage, of course, but it would be steady work. Susan, you could clean the displays and bathrooms. Hannah, you could run the gift shop. What do you say? Family helping family, right? The look of horror on their faces was worth every penny I'd turned down from the private company. Susan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You want me to be a janitor? She finally sputtered. After everything I've done for you? And what exactly have you done for me, Susan? I asked genuinely. Besides kick me out and call me ungrateful? Hannah grabbed her mother's arm. This is a waste of time. He's just being a jerk. Susan straightened her spine, her eyes narrowing to slits. You'll regret this, Ethan. Your father and I have options. Legal options. Good luck with that, I replied calmly. The will was very clear about the land being mine. The meteorite was found on my property. But hey, if you want to waste money on lawyers on top of those tuition bills, be my guest. They retreated to their luxury SUV, Susan stumbling slightly in her impractical heels. As they pulled away in a cloud of dust, I heard Grandpa's voice in my head, from one of our last conversations before he died. True family holds you up when you're falling, not just when you're standing tall. Later that evening, as the construction crew packed up the day, I sat in Grandpa's old lawn chair, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. My phone buzzed, a text from my father. Susan is talking to a lawyer about contesting the will. Says you're mentally unstable like Walter was. I'm sorry. Sorry. One word. After everything that had happened. Not sorry enough to stand up to Susan, apparently. Not sorry enough to come see me himself. Just sorry. I set the phone aside and looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. The same stars Grandpa and I had gazed at together. The same universe that had sent a piece of itself crashing into this very land decades ago, waiting to be found. I'm ready, Grandpa, I whispered to the twilight. Your treasure is worth fighting for. Let them come with their lawyers and their accusations. I had something they would never understand. The truth behind Grandpa's stories, the validation of his belief that the universe holds wonders for those patient enough to look. And no legal threat could take that away from me. As night fell completely, I thought about how far I'd come from that angry, confused kid who'd been thrown out 3 months ago. I'd survived on my own. I'd discovered something extraordinary. I'd made choices based on principle rather than profit. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace with who I was becoming. And if that meant fighting my so-called family in court, then so be it. Some treasures were worth protecting, no matter the cost. The lawsuit dragged on for 4 months. Susan hired some hotshot attorney from Phoenix who specialized in contesting wills, claiming that Grandpa Walter had been mentally unstable and that I was exploiting his delusions. Their case hinged on proving that Grandpa wasn't a sound mind when he made his will. A tough sell considering he'd had it properly notarized and had been sharp as a tack until his final days. My lawyer, Emma Sandoval, was a no-nonsense local attorney who took my case for a reduced fee after hearing the full story. I knew your grandfather, she told me during our first meeting. He fixed my refrigerator once when no one else could figure out what was wrong with it. Most sensible man I ever met, even with all his star talk. The final hearing fell on what would have been Grandpa's 78th birthday, a coincidence that felt like more than luck. I sat in the county courthouse, watching Susan and my father across the aisle, neither meeting my eyes. Dad looked thinner, older somehow, while Susan maintained the perfect poise of someone who expected the world to bend to her will. Emma laid out our case methodically. The properly executed will, testimonials from friends who knew Grandpa Walter, evidence of sound business decisions over the years. Then she dropped our ace, Dr. Melnick himself, testify about the scientific significance of the meteorite and how Walter Parker's delusions had proven remarkably accurate. In my professional opinion, Dr. Melnick stated, pushing his tiny glasses up his nose, Walter Parker observed an actual meteorite fall in the 1970s and spent decades trying to document it. Far from being delusional, he was simply ahead of his time in citizen astronomy. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, took less than an hour to make her decision. The will stands. The land and all discoveries made upon it legally belonged to Ethan Parker. Case dismissed. Susan stormed out, not even waiting for my father, who lingered awkwardly in the hallway as I gathered my things. I thought he might say something, apologize, maybe, or at least acknowledge what had happened. Instead, he just nodded slightly and followed his wife out the door. Some bonds, once broken, stay that way. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of locals had gathered. Roy from the gas station, Terry with his mutton chops, even Destiny smacking her gum. News travels fast in small towns, and apparently my fight against the city folk try to take my inheritance had won me some unexpected supporters. Knew you'd win, kid, Roy grunted, slapping my shoulder with a weathered hand. Your grandpa would have been proud. Hell, he probably would have brought popcorn to the courthouse. While the lawsuit was winding through the courts, construction on the visitor center continued. The basic structure was nearly complete, a modest but sturdy building designed to blend with the desert landscape, while still being visible from the highway. Inside, displays about meteor science and space exploration were taking shape, centered around a specially designed case that would eventually hold Grandpa's discovery. Susan tried one last desperate move, go to the local paper with claims that I was squandering a scientific treasure on a vanity project. The article backfired spectacularly. Instead of turning public opinion against me, it generated new interest in the center. People in town started referring to me as the kid who caught a star, a nickname that would have made Grandpa howl with laughter. 6 months after finding the meteorite, something unexpected happened. A representative from NASA contacted me after reading about the discovery. Apparently, palladites of this size and quality were of significant scientific interest, and they wanted to send a research team to study it. They also expressed interest in potentially funding educational programs at the visitor center. What started as a modest museum exhibit snowballed into something bigger. With NASA's involvement came media attention, which attracted the interest of the state's tourism board. Suddenly, the Walter Parker Space Science Center wasn't just my project. It was becoming a potential destination, something that could put our little slice of desert on the map. By the 1-year anniversary of my discovery, the center was ready for its grand opening. What had once been Grandpa's weathered trailer and 10 acres of worthless desert was now transformed. The trailer remained, carefully preserved and incorporated into the site design as a testament to where everything began. But beside it stood a modern 5,000-square-foot facility with interactive exhibits, a small planetarium dome, and an observation deck with a research-grade telescope for night sky viewing. The State Tourism Board had come through with a matching grant of $400,000 when they realized the potential for science tourism. Between that, the ongoing museum partnership and merchandise sales, what had started as a tribute to Grandpa had become a legitimate business. I was far from super rich, but I was financially secure in a way I never would have imagined a year earlier. On opening day, I stood at the entrance, watching as the first visitors arrived. Mostly locals, but some science enthusiasts who'd driven from as far as California. Children ran excitedly toward the meteorite display, parents trying to keep up while reading the informational plaques about space rocks. Using some of the proceeds, I'd established a Walter Parker Scholarship for students interested in astronomy or geology, $5,000 each for two deserving seniors from the local high school every year. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I announced the first recipients: Maria Gonzalez, who wanted to study planetary geology, and Alex Thompson, whose homemade telescope had won the state science fair. "My grandfather used to tell me," I said to the small crowd gathered under the desert sun, "that the real treasure isn't what you find, but what you do with it." He believed that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. That wonder should be accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford it. Roy stood near the back, uncharacteristically cleaned up in what appeared to be his only button-down shirt, nodding along as if he'd known this outcome was inevitable. Dr. Melnick was there too, his ZZ-top beard now adorned with NASA pin, looking slightly uncomfortable with the socializing, but pleased with the scientific exhibits. With the center up and running, I finally had time to think about my own living situation. The trailer had been preserved as part of the exhibit, which meant I needed a new place. Using some of the NASA grant money and income from the center, I built a small but comfortable house on the adjacent property I'd purchased. Nothing fancy, just a modern two-bedroom with large windows that framed the desert sunset and, most importantly, a reliable air conditioning system and proper plumbing. Life fell into a rhythm. Weekdays were spent running the center, giving tours to school groups, and working with the occasional research team that came to study the meteorite or the surrounding area. Evenings and weekends were mine to enjoy the quiet of the desert and the satisfaction of having created something meaningful. 4 months after the opening, during a special night sky viewing event at the center, I met Allie. She'd driven from Tucson with her younger brother, a space-obsessed 12-year-old who'd been begging to see the Arizona star rock for months. While her brother pressed his eye to the telescope, excitedly identifying constellations, Allie and I got talking. She was working on her master's in education, planning to teach high school science. Her laugh was genuine, her questions about the center thoughtful. When she teased me about my space cowboy vibe, I found myself more tongue-tied than I'd been during my TV interviews. "So you really live out here in the desert because of a promise to your grandfather?" she asked, leaning against the observation deck railing, the Milky Way sprawling above us. "More like because of what he taught me," I replied, "that the universe rewards patience, that some things are worth waiting for." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "And was the meteorite worth the wait?" "Definitely, though I'm finding there are other things worth waiting for too." Allie started visiting regularly, eventually helping develop educational programs for the school groups that came through. Our relationship grew naturally, like something that had been written in the stars long before we met. She understood my connection to this place, to Grandpa's legacy, in a way I never had to explain. On the anniversary of Grandpa's passing, I took Allie to the original spot where I dug up the meteorite. The depression was still visible, though now marked with a small plaque explaining its significance. We sat on the desert floor as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You know what I think would make your grandfather really happy?" Allie asked, her head resting against my shoulder. "What's that?" "That his stories live on, not just in the center or the scholarship, but in how you talk about him to the kids who visit. The way you've made his passion accessible to everyone. You've turned one discovery into thousands of possibilities." She was right. Every time I saw a child's eyes widen at their first glimpse of the meteorite, or watched a teenager peer through the telescope and gasp at Saturn's rings, I felt Grandpa's presence. These moments of wonder were his real legacy, the spark of curiosity that could grow into a lifetime of exploration. The center thrived, eventually expanding to include a research facility where scientists could study not just our meteorite but other space samples. The Walter Parker Scholarship grew to support 5 students annually. My relationship with Allie deepened, and we began planning a future together that would balance her teaching career with my work at the center. My father reached out exactly once, about a year after the court case. A brief, awkward call to let me know he and Susan were divorcing. I wished him well, but didn't invite him to visit. Some bridges stayed burned, and I'd made peace with that. On quiet nights, I still sometimes sit in Grandpa's old lawn chair outside the preserved trailer, a can of cola in my hand, Johnny Cash playing softly from my phone instead of his old radio. I look up at the vast canopy of stars and think about how one piece of that infinity changed everything for me. The treasures are hiding where no one looks, Grandpa used to say. He was talking about meteorites buried in the desert, but I think he meant something deeper too. The real treasures were the principles he lived by, the wonder he never lost, the way he taught me to look up at the stars and see possibilities instead of just points of light. Sometimes, when the night is especially clear and the Milky Way stretches like a road across the sky, I could swear I see a star twinkle just a little brighter than the others. And I know, somewhere in that great beyond, Grandpa Walter is winking down at me, proud of what his worthless piece of desert became. Not just a tourist attraction or a research facility, but a place where dreams take root and grow, where curiosity is currency, and where a story about a fireball from the sky continues to inspire new generations to look up and wonder. That's a legacy worth more than any meteorite, no matter how rare. And as for me, the kid who once ate clearance canned beans and howled with the coyotes, I found something far more valuable than a space rock. I found my purpose, written in the stars long before I knew how to read them.